Hey, Scott Hilton's got to talk. Let's talk about the DC movie universe. Could Henry Cavill return as a villain? Or people are like, he could be Batman. I'm like, they're not going to make Henry Cavill Batman. I know they're going to, with the Robin already established, they're going to need someone a couple years on him. But he would be a good villain. He would be great as Deathstroke. You know, when the Teen Titans movie is announced, they're going to definitely use Deathstroke. He was quite the force against the Teen Titans. And the brilliance of the team that they put together, that George Perez and Marvel Wolfman put together, was that each character had his own unique thing to give to the team. It wasn't just a bunch of heroes stuck together. You know, it was a little different, and that was what made it good. The original Justice League was a little different. It was, you know, you had the Martin Manhunter, and you know, he had powers almost like Superman, but he had this ability to shapeshift, do different things, and if there was an extraterrestrial threat, you would have him on your side. In Teen Titans, it was Starfire. She was extraterrestrial. It was Magic. You had Raven. You know, you had Robin for a normal person having to lead the team and take on Deathstroke and people that were somewhat normal. You know, each one had their own unique thing to give. And having, you know, these big actors, they've said Robert Pattinson will not return as Batman in DCU. He could be a villain. He'd be a good Riddler, you know, something like that. Riddler has become a very prominent member of Batman's gallery. Now, Robert Pattinson, they used him right away, and as a threat. And in the comics, he became, since he's so smart, he became a threat. Challenge more, not just riddle me this like they did in the old Batman TV show with Adam West. You know, he would have little riddles and schemes and things, but he became more of a deadly threat. Like Brainiac in Superman has become, you know, although his origins are from another world, he also has origins on Krypton now. Just like Doomsday had origins on Krypton and weaved into his origin to make it more interesting. They do that with Spider-Man all the time. Someone's related to somebody that's dating somebody, that makes it harder for Spider-Man to get the bad guy and face him. You know, we saw that in the first movie with Tom Holland, where he's dating the prom girl at the prom, and he opened the door, and it's, you know, the bad guy is the dad, and you're like, oh crap. So yeah, Henry could be a good villain. He could be, I mean, in a couple of years, I think he'll pop up as somebody. He's still working out. He still looks good. He could be a Hawkman. You got Jason Momoa, who just finished up as Aquaman. And James Gunn said Aquaman will not be prevalent in the DC universe for at least 2 years or more. He's just not on their slate of characters to pop up. The Atlantis thing and dealing with that. In the comics, in the old ones, they had Aquaman only could stay out of water for an hour. And that was like, yeah, that just limits your storytelling. And in the movie, Superman, you know, they made sure he could get his butt kicked a little bit. You can't have a hero like in the comics. And they tried that. They tried to, you know, whatever sells comics, they'll do. And John Byrne, who was brilliant at Marvel, you know, they snoozed up to him and said, hey, you know, you can write and draw and do whatever you want. Pick a character. And he said, I'd like to do Superman. They said, done. You know, whatever you want to do, pretty much. And he redid Superman, not as powerful. And it was popular, but it wasn't so popular that they kept it going. They finally upgraded his powers again and all that. But yeah, in the movies, it looks like he's going to have some limits to his powers. And there are going to be a lot of actors in Marvel and that they could use. They could use it over and again. And DC characters. You know, you just recast them as villains. You know, Ben Affleck, you want to be a villain? He's probably like, yeah, I want to be a villain. And in the comics, they have given Bruce Wayne a brother, Thomas, that's a little mentally unstable, kind of a little bit of a killer. And he was erased from history because the Waynes put him in a home that would, keep an eye on him, because he was a danger to, like in the Dexter Origin show, Dexter had a brother, and the guy was a little psycho. After what they saw, that made them both psycho. But you have to see the show to see what's going on with that. And they snuck it in. And the Court of Owls that Scott Snyder created for the DC Universe, he's always creating something good for the DC Universe. He's got pretty much free reign. He took Batman to another level. And the Court of Owls knew about Thomas. And I would think everyone in Gotham would know about Thomas. I mean, a kid gets born, first heir to the throne, Thomas Wayne Jr. You know what I mean? I would think they all knew, but it's like he got older and a little more of a danger to Bruce, and he wasn't really that stable, and they put him in homes, and the Waynes pushed the money for it, but they changed the name so that he, people wouldn't realize who he was, to not embarrass the family. And in that origin story, it was Alfred's father was the butler. And when Alfred came, he just knew of Bruce, but I think he knew of Thomas. So they could still work it in there. Maybe Thomas could be with the Court of Owls, because they like to train people to be assassins and keep them around. They had the technology to, in the first Court of Owls, they got the DNA, and Batman would hide the DNA of all his team. It would disappear magically from databases. There was no DNA or fingerprints around for Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, anyone like that. And when they got one of the Court of Owls talons or assassins, they called talons, they did the DNA. He got into the Batcave, and they got the DNA. And it was Dick Grayson's grandfather, a circus performer that had disappeared or died or whatever. And they had him, and they were like, what in the hell? And they realized the Court of Owls it would freeze like Bucky and Marvel. Yeah, everyone borrows from everybody. The Winter Soldier, they'd freeze him and bring him back when they needed him. And the Court of Owls did the same thing. They would have assassins, and they'd just thaw them out, bring them back, and use them again and again, these talons. And Thomas Wayne became, he could be Henry Cavill. It's called, you be a villain, you be Bruce Wayne's brother. And the thought of the guy that plays Reacher being Batman, he looked, the drawing they did for Creature Commandos of Batman was big, a big guy. And it could just be more padding, it could be more body armor. And they did it as dark as possible, because James Gunn's like, I don't want to commit. Just make him darker, more silhouette. That's what he said. He said, I don't want to commit. And Alan Richardson, I think his name. And he's great. He would be great. He would be a great Batman. But you couldn't replace him again. See, something happened, you'd be like, we got to recreate Batman, or bring Robin up, Dick Grayson up as Batman or something. We got to think of something. And in the comics, they have, he said, James Gunn said there was no New York City, supposedly he said this, in the DC Universe. And you're like, what? And the Atomic Knight that was in the silhouette pictures of the Hall of Justice, that mural there, happened after a nuclear event. And you're like, did New York get blown up? And Metropolis and Gotham are the only main cities? Wow. But yeah, it would be neat. Alan Richardson could be Bane. He's a big guy. But sometimes you might need a big guy to beat the hell out of people and to do what he does. And in the Dark Knight Returns novels that Frank Miller did, one of the later novels mentions the fact that the new girl that was the new Robin, that would go on to become a Batwoman and a Catgirl and different things. They mentioned the fact that Bruce says, I just beat the hell out of him. But she took it to a new level. She was very graceful. She was like a dancer, like a ballerina. She could do all the stuff with grace and dignity and take on anybody and make it look easy. And she was the real talent. So he admired her for that. And that was a future story, but it could be brought to life. But the fact he beat the hell out of him, you could get Alan Richardson, or you could make him Bane, or make him some other guy. But they might sneak in Thomas at some point, or they just ignore that. The Court of Owls needs to be introduced. They're a great villainous group that's been around for generations. You know, and Scott Snyder created them. He said that children would tell bedtime stories of the, you know, owl, you know, someone watching from your room in your bed to scare little kids go to sleep, you know. And he said it wasn't untrue. There were trap doors, tunnels throughout Gotham. There were, you know, hidden panels and cameras, and there was always the Court of Owls watching. And there was in the TV show on the CW, Gotham, I think, it had what looked like an owl watching over the police in the police station with Jim Gordon. And I was like, that's the Court of Owls. Oh, crap. And they didn't do a lot with it. They did a little, but they didn't do a lot with it. And they introduced a Joker in that show that they weren't going to commit to the Joker, but the guy did such a great job. They were like, okay, he'll be our Joker, because we got to wrap this stuff up. He'll be our Joker. And he was crazy, and he did a good job as the guy from Shameless. And so I'm looking forward to the new DCU to see who they cast. I think they're not going to spend big bucks on big actors unless they're playing one-shot villains. They could bring them in, pay them the big bucks. And that way they're casting younger people. I've heard they're going to cast younger people for X-Men, more unknowns. That way, you know, you get them cheap, you sign them to long-term deals. I mean, Chris Evans says he was scared to death to sign a 10-picture deal with Marvel. You know, he's or 10 years of his life, he would be pretty much committed. But he said some of them were guest shots. It was just a quick scene. Like, you know, I think in one of the Thor movies, he just appeared as Loki changing shapes into Captain America. And it was just a quick scene, but it counted as one of the movies. And he was like, you know, it wasn't that bad. Now it's over. It was worth it. It was 100% worth it for him. So this will make some stars out of a couple people, most likely, and get the DC universe rolling. But you could sneak in a Henry Cavill. He was great in Mission Impossible. He's a kind of a anti-hero agent jerk. So yeah, I would think with Jason Momoa coming on as Lobo, you could sneak in anyone you want, really. And, you know, Teen Titans, that's a lot of people that get. They did a pretty good job with the TV show. But, yeah, we'll see what they do. See if they get the more armored look Nightwing costume like they did in the TV show. And if they do more armor for Batman, they have to keep that going. You know, the spandex is stupid. And Superman's uniform in the new DCU was just a softer uniform. It wasn't quite as super muscular. You know, it was easy on the kids, you know, it made kids comfortable. So that was the whole point of the trunks and the ridiculousness of it. So what do you think? The DCU, will James Gunn address that? Could Henry be a villain? Could Robert Pattinson make an appearance as a villain, or a guest star as somebody? It's just a quick scene, just as a wink, you know, as a doctor on the side. Wouldn't that be fun? So, or a voice of one of the robots. They have a new robot, and Robert Pattinson's voicing him, just for the fun of it. He's like, you want to do it? He's like, sure. He'd be like, sure. So, like and subscribe and share if you've learned anything, what you think of the DC Universe and what they'll do. Have a good day. Bye.